Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman is with me. You've written on more than one occasion about Hungary and have been most concerned about it. Is this the moment that Viktor Orban faces down?
Well, God knows. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of accumulated power, but it's hopeful. I mean, it's good to see that this regime, which has tried this kind of soft, covert destruction of democracy, has not managed to completely crush public opposition. So, I mean, we saw the same thing in Poland, where the municipal elections were a big defeat for law and justice. So maybe this sort of white nationalist rule is not an end state.
You've been sort of critical of the European authorities for not being stronger and not doing so quicker. Today, the European Court ruled against Poland, but the feeling is that this should have been dealt with at a political level much sooner.
That's right. I mean, what's been happening in Hungary, that's been obvious for a long, long time that they were chipping away at democracy, and Poland is a shorter time horizon, but they've also been at it for years, and the EU has been remarkably unwilling to face up to the reality. I mean, we've basically seen democracy effectively destroyed in two EU nations, and the EU has only now said, well, you know, we're going to tap you on the wrist a little bit.
It's damning for the EU that this is happening.
Yes, it is. The EU is supposed to be not just an economic thing. It's supposed to be about democracy. It's supposed to be a guarantor of democracy in its member states, and it hasn't been fulfilling that role.
And yet, Brexit, of course, on the other side of it, larding on the problems.
Well, yes, that's a whole other thing. And wow, what a mess. I mean,
There's no easy, obvious, or good solution at the moment.
Well, I mean, Brexit is, I would say, a bad idea economically, but it's not that bad an idea if it was carried out in an orderly fashion. But what has happened is that there have been no contingency plans. So at the moment, if Britain just bombs out of the EU, it doesn't have the infrastructure, it doesn't have the customs inspectors. The flow of goods through Dover falls by 60 or 70%, which is catastrophe and a totally avoidable one. So it's amazing that they've gotten to this point.
And the deadline is just...
No, we're
there.
We're practically there. It's as if it's like, you know, flooding the tunnels but nothing physical going on. It's just lack of contingency planning.
The Prime Minister's strategy of basically putting her deal at the last possible moment, such that failure of that vote is calamitous.
Well, it's brinksmanship, and the trouble with brinksmanship is sometimes you end up going over the brink. And it's not. Yeah, I have to say, you know, I talk to my British friends, and I say, because I say, you know, our bad guys are much worse than your bad guys, but you have no good guys. The mismanagement here is just astonishing.
Bringing you back to the United States and the lessons that can be learned, because you've written on that as well. When you look at what's happening in the rest of the world, and you see what in your view would be the US's lack of action, lack of leadership,
right?
Is that what's driving things worse?
I mean, around the world?
Yes.
Well, I mean, no. We shouldn't have delusions of grandeur. Most of what's going on in the world is other people, but we're not there to the extent that the U.S. has historically been a voice saying we need to preserve the system, we need to preserve democracy. Now we're out of it. If anything, we're leaning in the opposite direction. So I mean, the EU should be able to take care of its own affairs, but in fact, it's proving not to, and the United States is not being a help.
There is a very volatile, noxious cocktail of events out there. One MDB in Malaysia, which is that. Brexit in the UK, China trade, the US chaos in the administration, all of which bodes ill, I'm trying to suggest, for what happens next.
Yeah, I mean,
or am I overstating?
Well, I think some of these are unrelated. I'm not sure that one MDB has, and look, I mean...
No, but they could all end up being, they're not related to each other, but they could all end up creating an effect.
Well, that's right, and the point is that we normally count upon a certain amount of technocratic management and then a certain base level of competence in leadership. And the technocrats are still there but have limited scope to act, and the base competence is really missing. And so, yeah, this is what scares you. Who's in charge? Who's minding the store? Are there any adults in the room? And it's hard to find any.
Let's remind ourselves again of your masterclass. Have a listen to yourself giving a talk, a lecture.
Instead of saying, oh, it's a complicated world, I don't get it, say, all right, let me try to figure this out. Let me make sense of this. Doing economics requires stepping back from all of the details to say, what is the essential here? What is the story? It's about people. It's not about money. And it ends up being about what people do.
And isn't that what we need to remember in terms of, I have to remind myself this frequently, that when we talk about the Dow is down, whatever, and it's not just a number in the abstract.
That's right. And particularly actually right now, we talk about institutions. We have all these institutions. Won't the institutions save us? But the institutions are people. And if the people don't, make them work, it doesn't work. But yeah, economics is about what people do. It's not about numbers. And it's a huge, this is what, one of the great fallacies is to think that it's just about numbers, and you look at some charts and so on, and that tells the charts are only there to help you tell a story about what people are doing.
Finally, let me ask you, the US economic team, for want of a better phrase, the Treasury Secretary, the economic advisor, the Fed chair,
right,
the Fed governors, the USTR, do you have confidence?
Well, some of it, yes. I mean, the Fed is still the Fed, and they're still very smart. I don't always agree with them, but they are hard thinkers. USTR, I think there's a lot of residual competence in there. As for the rest, I mean, we have a chief economist who, as people have said, he's turned flamboyant wrongness into a form of performance art. I mean, so no, I mean, this is. So in a way, we've got a stool, and at least one of the legs of that stool is gone. So it's not very well supported.
Good to see you, sir. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you.